Sthapakaya cha dharmasya sarvadharmasvarupine Avatara varishtaya Ramakrishnaya te namaha. In today's discourse, I wanted to focus on one question. That question is, what is so unique about the Ramakrishna incarnation, the Ramakrishna Avatara? There have been so many avatars. There was Buddha, Rama, Krishna, Chaitanya. What makes Sri Ramakrishna so unique as an avatar? And Swami Vivekananda gives us a hint in the pranama mantra that I just recited. Sthapakaya cha dharmasya sarva dharma swarupine. I think Swamiji there gives a hint about why he considers Sri Ramakrishna to be the avatara varishta. He says sarva dharma swarupine. He's hinting here that what makes Sri Ramakrishna such a unique avatara is that he harmonized all the religions, all the religious paths. He was a Samanvaya-Avatara. And he explains this in more detail in an 1894 letter to his brother disciple, Swami Ramakrishnananda. So he says this, Swami Vivekananda says, "My dear brother, that Ramakrishna Paramahamsa was God incarnate, I have not the least doubt. His life is a searchlight of infinite power thrown upon the whole mass of Indian religious thought. He had lived in one life the whole cycle of the national religious existence in India. Whether Bhagavan Sri Krishna was born at all, we are not sure. And avatars like Buddha and Chaitanya are monotonous. Ramakrishna Paramahamsa is the latest and most perfect, the concentrated embodiment of knowledge, love, renunciation, catholicity, and the desire to serve mankind. So where is anyone to compare with him? He must have been born in vain who cannot appreciate him." This is what Swami Vivekananda says. And notice that he emphasizes the catholicity of Sri Ramakrishna as an avatara. And this is much less widely known. Sri Aurobindo, another great saint from the 20th century, he was also a great admirer of Sri Ramakrishna and had great reverence for him. He made a very similar statement in 1908. So Sri Aurobindo said the following. He said that Sri Ramakrishna was the last and greatest of all of the avataras, for while others felt God in a single or limited aspect, he, Sri Ramakrishna, felt him, God, in his illimitable unity as the sum of an illimitable variety. So Sri Aurobindo and Swami Vivekananda are both pointing to the same idea, that what makes Sri Ramakrishna such a unique and great avatara is that he was the Samanvaya-Avatara, that he harmonized all of the religious paths. So I just wanted to explore more deeply today, what are some of the main ways that he harmonized the different religious paths? And I would lump them into three different types of harmonizing. He harmonized the different schools of Vedanta, and in particular, how they understand the nature of God. That's number one. Number two, he harmonized the different kinds of spiritual practices within Hinduism, what are called the different yogas, especially the 4 different yogas. And number three, Sri Ramakrishna harmonized all of the world's religions. So I'll just explain each of these briefly. So number one, how did Sri Ramakrishna harmonize all of the different schools of Vedanta? So almost all of us know that Advaita Vedanta was founded by Gaudapada and Shankaracharya, and it's the most famous of the schools, we can say. But it's not the only school of Vedanta. There are many other schools of Vedanta, and many people don't know that there are many non-Advaitic schools of Vedanta. In particular, there are a number of Bhakti schools of Vedanta. Swami Tapasyanandaji, one of the great monks of our order, who was a vice president, he wrote a book called Bhakti Schools of Vedanta. I recommend the book if you're interested. So, what are some of these Bhakti schools of Vedanta? There's Ramanuja's Vishtadvaita Vedanta, there's Madhva's Dvaita Vedanta, there's Vallabha's Shuddhadvaita Vedanta, and Chaitanya's Achinta Bheda Veda Vedanta, and there are some others, like Nimbarka school. So let's discuss briefly, how did each of these schools understand the nature of Brahman, the nature of God? According to Shankaracharya's Advaita Vedanta, the ultimate reality, Brahman, is only nirguna, which means without attributes, impersonal, and non-dual. And he makes explicit, he says clearly that it's only from the standpoint of ignorance, avidya, that we believe that we are individual souls, jivas, that there's a world of diversity here, this jagat, and that there is a personal God, Saguna Brahman, to whom we pray, who answers our prayers, who has created this world. All of that is true only from the vyavaharika standpoint, from the empirical standpoint, but from the ultimate standpoint, the only reality is nirguna Brahman, non-dual, impersonal, attributeless Brahman. So, just to give you one example from his commentaries on the scriptures, he says in his commentary on Brahma Sutra 2.1.14, he explains this is the status of the personal God. He says, thus Ishvara's rulership, omniscience, and omnipotence are dependent on the limiting adjuncts conjured up by ignorance, the upadhis that come from ignorance. But from the ultimate standpoint, such terms as the ruler, the ruled, omniscience, etc., cannot be used with regard to the Atman, shining in its own nature after the removal of all limiting adjuncts through knowledge. So this is a bit technical language, but what Shankaracharya is saying here is that we only think of Brahman as saguna, as personal, as Ishvara, so long as we are under the influence of ignorance, so long as we don't realize the highest truth of Nirguna Brahman. Now, that's Shankara's standpoint. What do other schools of Vedanta say about Brahman? According to Ramanuja's Vishishtadvaita Vedanta and Madhva's Dvaita Vedanta, they say exactly the opposite of Shankara. They say that Brahman is only Saguna and not Nirguna. They say Brahman is personal. He's Vishnu. He's Narayana. He's the loving personal God. He's omniscient. He's omnipotent. He has created this universe. And the aim of life is to dwell with him in an eternity in a higher loka called Vishnu Loka or Vraja Loka. This is their view. And then there's a third view among these Vedantic schools. According to the schools of Achintya Bheda Bheda Vedanta, that's the school of Chaitanya, and the school of Shuddha Dvaita Vedanta, which is the school of Vallabha and his followers, they say that Brahman is both Saguna and Nirguna. So Brahman is at the highest understanding of God is the personal God. And they call him Krishna. We all know Krishna, and they say Krishna is the highest form of God. But they say that Nirguna Brahman is also true. But that Nirguna Brahman is just a minor aspect of Krishna himself. So according to Achintya Bheda Bheda, Nirguna Brahman, the impersonal Brahman, the Advaitic Brahman, is just the Tanubha, the peripheral brilliance of Krishna himself. The word in Sanskrit is Tanubha. It means just a minor aspect. And according to Vallabha Shuddha Advaita Vedanta, this Advaitic Nirguna Brahman is the Charanam, the foot of Krishna. Again, it implies the same idea. The idea is that the highest truth is Saguna Brahman, but Nirguna Brahman is not unreal. It's not untrue. It's also there, but it's just a minor aspect of Krishna himself. So we see that there are these three main views among the traditional schools of Vedanta. Shankara's view is that Brahman is only Nirguna and not Saguna. The view of Ramanuja and Madhva is that Brahman is only Saguna and not Nirguna. And the view of Achintya Bheda Bheda Vedanta and Shuddha Dvaita is that Brahman is both Nirguna and Saguna, but there is a hierarchy. Saguna Brahman is the highest reality, and Nirguna Brahman is just a minor aspect of that personal God. These are the three traditional views within Vedanta. Now, what is Sri Ramakrishna's view? The beauty of Sri Ramakrishna is that he harmonizes all of these different traditional Vedantic understandings of Brahman. Like Shankaracharya, he fully accepts the reality of Nirguna Brahman. And he says that you realize Nirguna Brahman in Nirvikalpa Samadhi. And he gives the example of a salt doll. In Bangla, he says, Nuner Putul. He says, a salt doll goes to measure the depth of the ocean, but the moment he sets foot in the ocean, he melts into the ocean. So he gives this as an analogy to explain the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi, when we merge our individuality in non-dual Brahman. So he accepts Nirguna Brahman, but he also accepts the Saguna Brahman of the Bhakti schools of Vedanta. That's why he says again and again, Jini Nirgun Tini Shogun in Bangla, which means that reality which is Nirguna is also Saguna. And another one of his favorite teachings was Brahman and Shakti are Abheda. Brahma or Shakti Abhed. That Nirguna Brahman and the personal dynamic Shakti are both equally real aspects of one and the same infinite divine reality. And he also put the same point in a different way, in a very nice way. He said, when God is actionless, inactive, nishkriya, then I call God Brahman. And when God creates, preserves, and destroys this world, I call God Shakti. So in Bangla he says, যখন তিনি নিষ্ক্রিয় তখন আমি ব্রহ্ম বলে কয়, যখন তিনি সৃষ্টি স্থিতি প্রলয় করছেন তখন আমি শক্তি বলে কয়. So he's saying it's the same reality seen from different standpoints. And notice that unlike Achintya Bheda Bheda and Shuddha Dvaita, he doesn't put either Nirguna Brahman or Saguna Brahman in any kind of hierarchy. He doesn't say that Nirguna Brahman is higher than Saguna Brahman, and he doesn't say that Saguna Brahman is higher than Nirguna Brahman, like Achintya Bheda Bheda and like Shuddha Dvaita. He puts them on an equal footing. And this is unique in the history of Vedanta. So, this was the first way that he harmonizes the different religious paths. I just explained how he harmonizes different traditional Vedantic understandings of Brahman. Now, number two, how does Sri Ramakrishna harmonize the different yogas within Hinduism? We all know that there are four main yogas. There's Bhakti Yoga, the yoga of devotion, Jnana Yoga, the yoga of knowledge, Karma Yoga, the yoga of selfless works, and Raja Yoga, the yoga of concentration and meditation. What are some of the traditional Vedantic views of these yogas? According to Shankaracharya's Advaita Vedanta, only Jnana Yoga, the yoga of knowledge, leads directly to moksha. Only Jnana Yoga. But he gives some importance to the other yogas. He says that through Karma Yoga, we can attain Chitta Shuddhi, purification of mind, which makes us eligible to practice Jnana Yoga. Then we stop Karma Yoga, we practice Jnana Yoga, and we attain the highest goal of liberation. And he also says that Bhakti Yoga is also helpful for attaining purity and concentration of mind, but ultimately we have to practice Jnana Yoga in order to attain liberation. This is Shankaracharya's view. Now, the Bhakti schools of Vedanta, they say the opposite. They say that the highest practice is Bhakti Yoga, not Jnana Yoga. And they agree with Shankara that Karma Yoga is a lower practice that can help for purity of mind. And Jnana Yoga, Ramanuja for instance, he says that Jnana Yoga is also a very important discipline, but it's a lower practice than Bhakti Yoga. And Ramanuja understands Jnana Yoga in a very specific way. Ramanuja says that through Jnana Yoga, we should meditate on our true nature as the eternal Jivatma, the eternal soul dwelling in our hearts, which is different from the body-mind complex. And he says that through the practice of Jnana Yoga, we ultimately realize that we are this Jivatma apart from the body-mind complex. And then we become eligible to practice Bhakti Yoga, which is the highest discipline, which alone leads to moksha, which is dwelling in Vishnu Loka with Vishnu. Now, what does Sri Ramakrishna say? If you study the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, in Bangla it's Kathamrita, you'll find that again and again Sri Ramakrishna emphasizes that all four of the yogas can take you directly to the highest goal of God realization. He doesn't make a hierarchy. He doesn't say that Jnana Yoga is higher than Bhakti Yoga. He doesn't say that Bhakti Yoga is higher than Jnana Yoga. He says that all four of these yogas can take you directly to the highest goal. In one place, for instance, he says, Jnana Yoga is a valid path. Bhakti Yoga is a valid path. Jnana Bhakti, the combination of Jnana Yoga and Bhakti Yoga, is also a valid path. And in many other places, he also says that Karma Yoga is a valid path and that Raja Yoga is also a valid path. Swami Vivekananda, the chief disciple of Sri Ramakrishna, he said the same thing very, very clearly. He says, this is Swami Vivekananda, he says, each one of our yogas is fitted to make man perfect, even without the help of the others, because they have all the same goal in view. The yogas of work, of wisdom, and of devotion are all capable of serving as direct and independent means for the attainment of moksha. So that's the second type of harmonizing that Sri Ramakrishna achieved as an avatara. The third kind of harmonizing that he did is he harmonized the world's religions. This is very unique. He is the first avatara to have practiced religions other than his own. So he practiced Christianity. He meditated on the teachings of Christ, and he actually had a vision of Jesus merging into his own body. And he realized that Jesus was an avatara of God himself. And he also practiced Islam for a number of days, and he realized God through the path of Islam as well. And on the basis of his spiritual experiences, so remember, he did not harmonize as a philosopher, first and foremost. He was first and foremost a realized soul, a mystic. He was a kind of spiritual scientist. He taught the harmony of all religions and all religious paths on the basis of his own spiritual experiences, through his own spiritual experiments, we can say. And on the basis of these experiments, he came to the conclusion that all paths lead to the same goal, which is God realization. He said in Bangla, "Joto mot toto pot," as many faiths, so many paths. And another one of his teachings was, "Tini ananto patho ananto." God is infinite, and the paths to God are infinite. This is a very beautiful teaching because he explains why there's infinite paths to God. He says, God himself is infinite. He's both impersonal and personal, both with form and without form. He is Krishna, Christ, Chaitanya, Buddha, Allah. Because God is infinite, there are also infinite paths leading to God. So let us all hold up Sri Ramakrishna as the Samanvaya-Avatara and try to incorporate that catholicity, that harmonizing spirit, into our daily spiritual lives. We should try to combine the nishtha, that commitment, that devotion to our particular Ishtadevata, our particular practice, while at the same time having the broadness of Sri Ramakrishna, that harmonizing spirit. So Swami Vivekananda would often praise Sri Ramakrishna for being as deep as the ocean and as broad as the sky. I'll just end with a beautiful statement from Swami Vivekananda. In this passage, Swami Vivekananda explains really nicely how we can incorporate the broadness and the harmonizing spirit of Sri Ramakrishna into our own daily spiritual practice. Swami Vivekananda says the following: "I accept all religions that were in the past and worship with them all. I worship God with every one of them, in whatever form they worship him. I shall go to the mosque of the Mohammedan. I shall enter the Christian's church and kneel before the crucifix. I shall enter the Buddhistic temple, where I shall take refuge in Buddha and in his law. I shall go into the forest and sit down in meditation with the Hindu, who is trying to see the light which enlightens the heart of everyone. Not only shall I do all these, but I shall keep my heart open for all that may come in the future." Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Tat Sat. Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.